Okay, we'll get started. I am going to be a very, very minimalist chair and say very, very little and just get on with the speakers. I guess it's the graveyard shift before drinks, but it is I thought it was the most interesting, I guess, event on the program. So I'm going to be awake, not just because I'm chair, because I'm very excited about these speakers, and I think it's got a lot of interest from councils who are beginning to really look at their contracts expiring and needing to really factor in energy for waste in the near term. Contractors, I think, in the room who are all developing different facilities and looking for lessons learned, and the regulatory perspective is very interesting. So, like a lot of these talks, where everyone's got 20 minutes, but I think because there's sort of some similarities in particularly the different project talks. Look, if you've got a question after a talk, I'm sure there'll be time to ask it, but we might try and get everyone up here at the end as well, I'm sure we'll have time to ask questions, because it might be, people might have different answers to the same question. So the first speaker, we've got Rob Hogan, who's the Acting Director of Strategy and Policy at the EPA. And he's going to provide an update on energy for waste in New South Wales. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Josh, and good afternoon, everyone. As Josh mentioned, Rob Hogan from New South Wales EPA, and I'll be kicking off this session on energy from waste with an update on what's happening in New South Wales. First, I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're meeting, the Gumbaynggirr people here in Coffs, and I extend my respects to their elders, past and present. A quick outline of what I'll be covering in my 15 minutes or so today. Firstly, as I'm the first speaker on energy from waste this afternoon, I'll briefly run through what energy from waste is, then a quick scene setting about where we're at with waste management in New South Wales, and onto a bit of a refresher on the energy from waste policy and regulatory framework in New South Wales as well, because I know we've got a pretty varied audience here. And I'll touch briefly on the facilities that we've got in place and in the pipeline here in New South Wales. Next, I'll go through some of the detail of the energy from waste options paper that we currently have out for consultation. And finally, I'll touch on what's next for us. A quick slide here on what we mean by energy from waste when we talk about it in New South Wales. Gail mentioned this morning we all have different views and things, so in the panel discussion. So it broadly covers a system that takes residual waste, that is the waste left over after the recyclable materials have been mostly removed, and uses a thermal process such as incineration, pyrolysis, or some other thermal process to essentially recover the embodied energy from that material. And energy can be recovered in various forms, such as heat or as a fuel, as Gail did mention as well, which can then be used to generate electricity or used in machinery, vehicles, industrial processes and the like. So on to something a little broader about waste management in New South Wales. Since I first started working in the waste space for the EPA around 15 years ago, I've seen a number of really big shifts in how we think about and manage our wastes. I actually haven't been to a COF conference for about 10 years because I've been off doing some other things, but I've noticed the conversation has changed coming here this time. Some people are actually positive about the levy, which is great. But we've included, the things I've seen in terms of shifts have included some really groundbreaking initiatives over the last 10 or 15 years. As I said, waste less, recycle more. Lots of funding going into resource recovery. Return and earn, our container deposit scheme. Yes, the waste levy, I think, is a positive. And things like community recycling centres. We've got over 100 of them around the state now, helping to keep the nastier stuff out of our waste streams. And also We currently recycle about 2/3 of our waste here in New South Wales. There's a little asterisk on that, maybe it's 73% if you joined in on the panel discussion this morning, but about 2/3, and continue to press forward with a number of circular economy reforms such as FOGO and the recent Product Lifecycle Responsibility Act for batteries. So really pushing forward with our waste management. However, as we saw, we had some significant flood-related challenges a couple of years ago for Sydney's waste, and with our projected landfill capacity starting to get a bit thin, our disposal options for our residual waste are more limited than we would like. The New South Wales Waste and Sustainable Materials Strategy, or WASM, notes that energy from waste is a legitimate residual waste management option and goes on to say that energy from waste facilities are needed in New South Wales to help meet the state's residual waste disposal needs. Additionally, energy from waste can add that important diversity and resilience element to our waste management systems. So, a few slides here and a bit of a recap of the energy from waste policy and our regulatory framework in New South Wales. Firstly, and as I mentioned, energy from waste is supported as a residual waste management option, but only approved types and in approved areas according to our policy and legislation. It's critical that we do closely manage where and how energy from waste activities can occur to ensure we protect our communities and the environment, and to ensure it doesn't curtail other circular economy initiatives into the future. So we need to keep that in mind. So our POEO general regulation achieves this by broadly prohibiting energy from waste, but then making exceptions such as for facilities within identified precincts or those burning certain eligible fuels and excluding other activities. So these requirements are all set out in our New South Wales Energy from Waste policy statement. This flowchart might help and go through a bit more clearly how it all fits together. I find it easier to read from the right-hand side and then across to the left. The right-hand side has the things that are not considered to be energy from waste and therefore not captured by our framework. This includes thermal processes where there is no change in the chemical composition of the material. Think remoulding glass back into glass. It also includes things like autoclaving for sterilisation and biological processes like anaerobic digestion and composting of waste. Moving further to the centre, that smaller green box, we have processes captured by the framework, but that can be carried out anywhere in New South Wales, subject of course to our development consent and EPA licensing where required. The first of these in that green box is the use of eligible waste fuels. And these are those that the EPA considers to pose a low risk of harm to the environment and human health due to their origin, composition and consistency. And they're things like biomass from agriculture, forestry, sawmilling residues, uncontaminated wood waste, and landfill gas fits in there as well. Moving further to the centre left, in the big blue box there, we have activities that can also be carried out anywhere that use waste-derived fuels to replace a less environmentally sound fuel such as coal in an existing industrial or manufacturing facility. And finally, on the left, we have the energy recovery facilities that don't meet any of the other exclusions or requirements, so must be carried out in an identified precinct. And presently, these are West Lithgow, Parkes, Richmond Valley, and Southern Goulburn Mulwaree. A little more on the requirements for the facilities in these areas in a moment. Firstly, I'll briefly touch on the concepts behind the precinct approach. This slide notes the key considerations and criteria that were used as a basis to identify the current precincts. As you can see, there are a mix of practical matters such as transport infrastructure, with local matters such as jobs, investment and energy, and environment and human health matters such as local air quality and housing density as well fit in there. So just to wrap up this recap on our existing framework, I'll quickly run through the requirements for those facilities in precincts and replacing fuels. Our policy statement sets out that technical criteria such as time and temperature for the combustion process emission standards and continuous monitoring and reporting requirements for those key pollutants that are generated by these facilities, minimum thermal efficiency requirements, i.e. that's a proportion of energy that you need to recover, and minimum upstream resource recovery rates for in-feed fuels. New South Wales, of course, has a comprehensive planning assessment framework that requires a thorough assessment by proponents and includes review by key agencies such as us, the EPA, and also requires comprehensive consultation as well. So looking at the main current facilities and proposals in New South Wales, we have the Veolia Woodlawn Eco Precinct. The proposal, it's currently under assessment in our planning system, and that's up to 380,000 tonnes per year residual waste. Tribe Infrastructure Group also has a Parks Energy Recovery Facility proposal that's not yet in our planning system. So it's still in the early proposal stage, 600,000 tonnes estimated a year, and Andrew Smith from Tribe will be on a little later this afternoon in this session to talk about this one. We also have 2 operating facilities that were in place prior to the current framework coming into force in 2022, and which are therefore not subject to the requirements, but they do of course have comprehensive development consent and EPA licensing requirements that apply to them. These are the Boral Cement Kiln in Berrima. This uses solid waste derived fuels such as residuals from construction and demolition waste, resource recovery facilities and processes. And the other one is Green Distillation Technologies out at Warren, which uses pyrolysis to recover carbon, oil and steel from waste tyres. So that's it for the recap. Onto more the current work we're doing. The EPA has progressed a review of the Energy from Waste framework for the New South Wales Government. We've made some preliminary findings and identified potential changes to this framework. We are seeking feedback on these changes, and we released an options paper a couple of months ago, and it closes this Friday, on 16th of May. So if you're getting your comments together, get them in. The options paper outlines potential changes to the precincts, to the definition of thermal treatment, and to the exception relating to the replacement of fuels for powering industrial and manufacturing processes on site that I mentioned previously. I'll go through each of these in a little more detail now. So for the precincts, we are consulting on several possible changes. Richmond Valley Council resolved back in November 2022 to pause its efforts to develop an energy from waste facility. We also don't have any current energy from waste proposals for this area, and we are therefore seeking feedback on the possible removal of the Richmond Valley precinct. For West Lithgow, the original precinct map was revoked after Energy Australia at the time had an application in, but they withdrew that. However, we know there's renewed interest in the area of West Lithgow at the former Wallerawang Power Station, and we are seeking feedback as part of this consultation on extending the existing West Lithgow precinct out to include the Wallerawang site and gazetting a new map for that area. We also have a potential opportunity for an energy from waste facility in the Hunter region at Tomago, and that's been identified through analysis commissioned by the EPA and considered against those principles for locations of energy from waste facilities I outlined earlier, and it may be suitable. We're therefore seeking feedback as part of this consultation on establishing a new energy from waste precinct for Tomago. Finally, no changes are proposed to the Parks Special Activation Precinct, where Tribe Infrastructure is working on a proposal, as I mentioned, nor the Southern Goulburn Mulwaree Precinct, where Veolia's proposed facility is undergoing that planning assessment. The second element we're consulting on is additional exemptions from that definition of thermal treatment, i.e. those processes and activities that aren't captured by the framework. For example, the current exemptions include thermal treatment for waste plastic if at least 65% is converted into plastic products or inputs for plastic products. So that's exempt from our framework. So there's an opportunity to expand this exemption to allow for other types of waste to be thermally treated to produce new products or inputs for those products. And we're seeking input on that or comment. And a further option we're seeking comment on is to have an exclusion for processes that result in a clear environmental benefit. This could allow for other thermal treatment activities. For example, the one we've listed in the options paper could be generating sustainable aviation fuel, for example, if they could be shown to produce such a clear environmental benefit. The final change we're looking at and we're consulting on is the potential to expand the use of waste-derived fuels to replace other types of fuels used in or to power industrial or manufacturing processes at existing premises. So currently, as I mentioned before, the replacement of the fuels with waste-derived fuels is only permitted for existing facilities that are using coal or petroleum-based fuels. We're seeking comment on whether the EPA should expand this exemption to allow for existing facilities to replace LPG, so liquid petroleum gas, natural gas and liquefied natural gas with energy recovery from waste on a case-by-case basis where it results in a more environmentally sound outcome. I will note here that we've already received a lot of robust feedback on this item, which we will closely consider. So to wrap things up, on to next steps. As noted, the consultation on our options paper closes this Friday, after which we'll be reviewing. We've had more than 250 submissions and deciding on a way forward. We'll also be continuing on with the important job of assessing and advising on these new energy from waste proposals as they come through the planning system to ensure the proposals are sound, but importantly that our assessments are timely and we're getting those done and getting out of people's way so they can run their facilities. Finally, the significant interest we've seen in our consultation shows that people are engaged in and definitely care about energy from waste issues, particularly in their local areas. It is important they're able to access clear and factual information about it. This was raised again as a key issue in the panel discussion earlier today, and we are therefore developing better information for the community about energy from waste, including about the risks and how they're managed. So thanks for your time and your interest this afternoon. I'm done.
Thanks, Rob. Maybe we'll wait. If you've got questions, write them down or think of them. Or you want to... Yeah? Yeah, I mixed it up. I said to Rob, we'll do questions straight away, but I think let's I think we move it on and so that you can be up here too and it's not just the other three. So can I invite now Scott Reynolds, who's the General Manager of Kwinana Energy Recovery. And yep, this is exciting, one of the most progressed facilities, vision to reality, lessons from Australia's first energy recovery facility. Thanks.
Cool. Good afternoon, everybody. So I think we're just here today to give everybody an update on where we are at Kwinana. And I think the key thing here is that we're up and running, we're operational. This is a huge success, and we want to take you through what the journey we've been on today, outline a bit about where we're at with the process, and also start to do some of that knowledge sharing back into the audience of people who are keen to hear about the journey we've been on and how this could inform part of their journey going forward. So just a quick bit about Acciona to begin with. As a renewable energy and sustainable company, we strive to provide solutions around the world for different challenges that different industries, different organisations need, whether that be in the waste space, in the energy space, in the water space. So we've got teams around the world delivering projects. We said there 60,000 people over, with 44,200 in Australia and New Zealand. We're happy to take on any challenge that's in that industry space, whether that be in the finance, build, own, operate, across that whole piece there. We've got experience there, and I think we're demonstrating that in what we're doing at Kwinana. In terms of how we do it, and that's for us just as important as what it is that we do. We are a people-centric organisation. We believe and we empower the teams of people to deliver projects. That's the way we do. We challenge and we want them to innovate, and we lead from the front. We don't step back. Many of you here today will probably have seen or be close to a project that we've delivered across all parts of the country. We've just put up there a few examples of current and recent projects there. The Western Harbour Tunnel, probably for those of you from Sydney will be aware of that, the new crossing. So that piece of infrastructure is ongoing now. The tunnel boring machines are being made, and they'll be moved from China to Australia later this year. Again, we've got water treatment, we've got transport solutions, energy solutions, including one of the largest wind farms in the country, along with desalination and energy distribution. Back to the clicker problem again. There we go. Okay, so moving to Kwinana, probably what everyone's here to find out about. So we are Australia's first operating energy recovery facility. We use proven technology to deliver safe, clean, and reliable resource recovery. Everyone's probably seen the slide before. Everyone's probably heard it before. But we can't stop talking about this. We can't stop pushing the message out there. If we don't believe it, and if everybody here doesn't take this away and start pushing it into all of the stakeholders that you engage with, we'll never get there, right? We are the informed. We're the ones who are driving this change, and we're trying to encourage everybody to get on with us and with everybody else in the room to really drive this energy recovery journey. From an energy recovery point of view, we need to understand the total benefits that this provides. So we're not just diverting waste from landfill. Yeah, that's clearly a benefit that comes, but there are a lot of other benefits that come along. We provide a lower carbon solution to managing waste. Energy recovery is a better option than landfill. It's not perfect, but there are options to improve that in the future. You can install carbon capture, and that's been done not just at pilot stage, but at full stage in the UK. And at the point when it's economically viable here, there'd be no reason that it couldn't be adapted into new energy recovery projects. We're supplying energy to the grid, and that's offsetting other baseload power that's been generated. And we also, more importantly, do resource recovery. Overall, we're recovering 96% of what comes through the front door. The majority of that is in the energy space, but beyond that, you've also got a significant portion of aggregate that's recovered for replacing virgin material in construction, and huge amounts of ferrous and non-ferrous metals, including both steel, iron, copper, aluminium, and rare earth and precious metals. So a few operating stats for what we're actually doing right here, right now. We are able to receive over 150 deliveries a day from our local authority and commercial partners. So those are coming in every day. As many of you have seen, if you visited or seen any videos, we're moving waste around with the crane system that's moving over 6.5 tons at a time. This is a very large-scale process that we're using, and we're feeding the grate, and then we're processing between 17 and 35 tonne an hour, depending on the calorific value. As we said, the furnace, we all know there's the magic 850 degrees for 2 seconds. We're typically running at well over 1,000 degrees. So we are in that very high range. That's not obviously what we guarantee, but that's the reality of what happens when we're processing this type of waste. In order to support that process, we're using over 300,000 cubes an hour of air, and that's going up through the stack, which is 87 meters high. We are continuously monitoring all of the emissions. They're being recorded, and they're being provided to the regulator. We do what we say on the tin. We have high-pressure steam going through to the turbine. That's turning over 5,500 RPM and generating power to the grid. And we're handling, in a year, over 100,000 tonne of bottom ash and 20,000 tonne of fly ash and APCR. So, what have we done so far? So far at Kwinana, up to the end of last month, we've diverted 114,000 tonnes of waste from landfill. Around about 85% of that is MSW from our local authority partners who have come in, with the remainder from our C&I suppliers. We've been monitoring the waste that's coming in, and we'll talk a bit about that in some of the lessons. It's a really important stage of what differentiates us from other residual waste outcomes is actually the quality of the material that we need and the actions that we need to take to understand that and monitor that along the way, whether that be through CCTV or whether that be actually physically tipping waste out and actually going through it, because it is important to understand your feedstock. We've also created over 19,500 tonnes of IBAA, and that material is now being reused. That material is being, as we stand here right now, being put into the civils works that's finishing the Kwinana site, and we've been working with our partners in our supply chain to actually get a product now that is ready for market, and people in WA can use this material. We've also recovered over 3,000 tonnes of ferrous and non-ferrous metal. The one thing that is sure is that our recycling isn't that great, right? There is a lot of containers, unfortunately, ending up in the red bin stream. We do find that, and that's just something there for people to take away. That is a lot of metal that would have otherwise ended up in landfill. So in terms of building Kwinana, I think everybody kind of understands a little bit that it's a complex process, it's a complex plant. And some of you may have visited, some of you may not. So we just wanted to take a minute just to try and give people an understanding of the complexity of what we're dealing with. So this is a shot from the 3D model, which shows every component, every pipe, wire, steel member, piece of equipment that we've installed inside the Kwinana facility. So I'm not going to try and talk through every single piece, but it gives everybody an idea of the complexity of what we're dealing with. And if anybody who's visited the site will see that as well. And a few snapshots from the build. This was the grate being lifted in. So this was in the early phase when we were actually lifting in the core pieces of equipment. And then later on, the key piece, which is the lifting of the steam drum, which sits right on top of the boiler, which is on the 17th floor, around about 45 meters up in the air. So, and then finally, the last section of the stack, again, lifted in carrying modules from China, and these were then brought through the local port and then lifted into place here at Kwinana. So to try and help people understand what we're trying to do, to give some sort of, I don't know, stats on what it is, there's over 475 kilometres of cabling on site. So for those that are in from WA, that's Perth to Albany as a cable, or round about the altitude that the ISS orbits at. From an effort point of view, we've expended over 3.5 million man-hours building the facility. We've carried out 26,500 inspection test reports. On everything we install, we have to go through the quality systems to ensure that when we put it together, it's going to work in the right way. We've installed over 30,000 tonnes of concrete, which is more than the Sydney Harbour Opera House roof. And we've installed 30 kilometres of pressurised piping. So again, more than 25 laps around the MCG, or if you're from WA, that's from the Kwinana site out to Rottnest. So we've got 7,500 technical drawings, all of which will need to be updated at the end to as-built, and over 7,500 tonnes of structural steel. So pretty significant facility. Again, more than what's going in the Eiffel Tower frame. So I think the key thing that a lot of people now want to understand is, what should we do? So I know Craig kind of introduced the COVID issue earlier on, so I thank him for that. Yeah, probably not the best of ideas to do it during a pandemic. Let's hope there's not one of them coming along anytime soon. But yeah, clearly it didn't help. But there was a lot of things here that we all probably either know or should think about. And yeah, we agree, safety must be the priority. But it isn't just a one-stop shop. This changes. When you start one of these facilities, you're on a green or brownfield site, and everyone's probably going down. By the time you finish the commissioning, you're in an operating facility. There's a huge difference in the safety regimes that you need at the start and that you need at the end. And you need a safety management system that can deal with that. The next one is to focus on developing a long-term sustainable business. I think there was a lot of talk about this earlier on as to how do we get these things going, and it isn't just about the initial capex. Yeah, we're not delivering a project. We're delivering a business. We're delivering a business that can run sustainably on its own for the next 25, 30, 35 years. That's the only way that we'll provide a service to our customers. We're not here for a good time, we're here for a long time. And that is really, really important. To invest with people and partners and organizations with aligned values, people who are going to be in this for the long haul and that understand, and we foster an environment of collaboration. We build trust and we build confidence in what we do. That is how we manage the stakeholders. That's how we go on this journey. As you say, we combine local expertise and international experience. That piece there, nobody can do this alone, and we don't have that capability in country right now. We need to bring people to help us with this. And we need to fully understand all of those regulatory and compliance requirements. There's, as you wouldn't be surprised, bringing in a lot of technology from Europe. Our supply chain are very good at building things to European standards, which are not quite the same as Australian standards. So that piece there is a huge lesson that I think people can take away to understand that their supply chains they use today, who work in different jurisdictions, need that education, need that support as well to bring them on that journey with us. And probably the last thing, waste just isn't waste. This isn't landfill 2.0. This is a completely different thing we're talking about here. We're talking about a fuel that's to a specification. We turn waste away that isn't to specification. That is really important for people to understand, that there are materials that we can't process, and that either by license. There's also materials that won't go through our process. Landfill has got a much broader category that they can take compared to energy recovery. So we've been on that journey. We've been working with our suppliers, both local authorities and commercial customers, around understanding what is and isn't suitable for energy recovery. And that education journey takes a long while. And that's something that we know we'll be on for some time. There's been a lot of talk about how long it takes to get a project up. And we're keen, we can share our journey here. It's been probably the longest and probably shouldn't be this long either. But this is what it's been. So I won't talk through the whole thing, but just picking on a few kind of key years for what they are. 2013. So in 2013, the key piece of enabling guidance was effectively the Waste Authority's position statement on energy recovery, which stated that if suitably located, managed, this is a safe technology. So that didn't place any restriction on location in terms of whether it had to be in a precinct or not. It didn't specify how big it had to be. It didn't specify anything. It said that if they are efficient and suitably regulated and placed in a way that doesn't impact the environment locally, they are safe. And I think that's a really key piece that then enabled all of the regulatory approvals to follow. That then also enabled the first waste supply agreements to be entered into, which started to build the basis for the business case. 2015, we started to have the approvals come through, and further local authorities started to get on board. And then obviously at the last year was when we actually fired the plants up. So this was the first time that the boilers had been run. We fed in waste, we produced IBAA, and now we've moved into 2025 where we've now started to export power and commence operation. So as we sit here today, we've just come off our first statutory outage. So we've reached the point where under all the pressure regulations, we have to inspect our vessels every year. We've gone through that process and we've now bringing the plant back online again, and we're now in that operating mode. So as we move towards the end of the time, we all talked earlier on about needing to bring communities on a journey. The first thing that we wanted to talk about in this piece was actually understanding who are all of your stakeholders, how do you bring them on that journey? And we thought it was worthwhile just putting it up here to try and help people understand how many we have. And there's some of them which are obvious. We understand the EPA, we understand the WorkSafe. But then we've also got all of the various councils, whether they be and commercial partners bringing waste. We've got the grid and all of the energy pieces, including the people who operate the market, both whether that be in the WEM, in obviously in WA or the NEM over here. all of the, then coming across the bottom, the people who deal with our offtakes. You know, as we talked about, this is a whole business that we're establishing here, and in order to make the whole piece work, we need our partners. We need someone to deal with the IBA. We need someone to deal with the APCR. We can't bury our heads in the sand and pretend it doesn't happen. So at the minute, we've got an outlet taking it to the Tullers facility at Sandy Ridge. That's a way of dealing with APCR. We're not here to say it's the best way or the only way or the way we'll do it forever, but it is a way. We need a degree of oversight and certification. We need O&M, we need EPC, and we need funding. All of these pieces together come together through, in this case, an SPV. Other people talked about other models for developing sort of infrastructure project, but we're here through an SPV, which is the Kwinana Energy Recovery. And ultimately, we need to all be bringing all of these stakeholders on the journey all the time, which, as you can see from the previous slide, is one hell of a long journey. So the other key piece around how we do it is being in the community. The Kwinana facility is located in WA, in the Kwinana Strip, one of the most heavy industrial areas in WA. So from that point of view, we don't have some of the neighbour issues that other proponents are obviously up against. But we do have a community who we engage with. We do have local industry who we engage with, who we create issues for, and they create issues for us. And we shouldn't shy away from those points. We should embrace them, and we should go out and understand how we impact each other so that we can manage it in the best way possible. We'll be developing a community education facility on site, and we'll be supporting that education process, not just about energy recovery, but the whole journey. We're working with DWER in WA so that we align our education messages with the state's education messages, with the local authorities' education messages, so that we go on this journey together. We end up partnerships with the universities around understanding how we can inspire and support the next generation of people coming through who want to understand what we do here. And we leave legacy of workforce who have actually gone through this process, who have built this and understand the process we're going through. And we support our local community, through whether it be through volunteering or sponsorship, to actually help them in their own journeys. So, time's nearly up for me, but if anybody's got any questions beyond whatever we get through this afternoon, depending on how long we hang on for, we're over at booth 11, if anybody wants to come and ask any questions after this. So, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Scott. I know it's getting harder to hold back questions, but we'll keep moving. Can I invite Andrew Smith, who's the General Manager of Tribe Infrastructure Group, to talk about what's happening in parks?
Afternoon. Andrew Smith from Tribe. We're going to start about a project here that's just starting development, and you just heard about one that's just starting operations, which hopefully will be quicker, but we'll see. We'll get to it. I'll run you through a bit of the background on it. I'm not going to concentrate on what waste to energy is and stuff like that. We've just had a great presentation how it works, so I'm just going to concentrate on what's happening with the project and how we're going to try and plan it to get the logistics working and the site out of Parks and what's going on with that. Parks, which is one of the precincts they've chosen, the EPA, as the special activation precinct out there, is 350 kilometres west of Sydney. It's in a special activation precinct, which is sort of a large industrial zone. It's where all the railways meet. There's several intermodal cities out there. And I suppose we've done some drop-in sessions in Parks recently, and a lot of people asking, why is it here? And I think the argument is that the government is looking for jobs in regional areas. You've got the intermodals, and that's a good spot to put it rather than in Western Sydney or in Sydney. But we'll deal with that one when it goes down the track. Yeah, we've heard about the landfill crisis, and this is one of the plants that we're hoping to get online by 2030. I'll show you a timeline later. 31 maybe, depending how fast they move. It's already been a long journey, so hopefully it speeds up. We started this with an expression of interest back in 2018, and 20. 17 groups responded to that proposal. They then got shortlisted for a non-binding offer. There was 3 in that. Then the binding offer and shortlisted. They then took us through another process called the BAFO, a best and final offer. Then some elections got in the way, so we waited a few months for that, and then we negotiated for another year. And finally, we signed contracts in the Friday before Christmas, which was lucky, because then we got Christmas off. Didn't have to work through that, but came back in January starting. So we've just kicked off the development progress. We have, obviously a long haul on these projects in New South Wales to try and do the environmental impact studies. And so what are we going to do? That is the Parkes region. You see the Park City there. The site is about 5 kilometres west of it in the Special Activation Precinct. The government, through its subdivision of the Department of Planning called Regional Growth Development Corporation, which is sort of our client for the SAP, they own the SAP. They've bought 4,600 acres out there. So it's a fairly big area. They've bought a lot of the properties, so there's big buffer zones. There is a railway line running right past the site, which I'll show you a picture of in a minute. So the plan is we're going to be putting waste on rail and taking it out to Parkes in containers similar to what Veolia is doing at Woodlawn for the last 20 years. The facility out there, as you heard from the EPA, we're planning 600,000 tonnes minimum. We're looking at waste market studies at the moment and how much is in the market. There is a lot more than that, but we're going to sit that at it'll be 2 lines. We will hopefully achieve 96% diversion like Kwinana is. We'll have a bottom ash recycling facility, which is the building behind the stack there on site. It'll put out very similar amounts of electricity into the grid at Parkes. The SAP is building a substation for us, which is nice because we don't have to build that. And the usual other same volumes of metals recovered and APCRs. We may treat the APCRs on site, we're not sure yet. That's the site. It's a very greenfield site. That's the old farmer's house there on the right. Just below the thing is the big Pacific National Intermodal Terminal. So we could take the containers in there and run them down, or we could even take from the railway line there a sort of a spur line in straight into the facility of the tipping hall, which saves an awful lot of handling and problems with odours straight in. You don't want to be opening trucks, opening up containers outside it. So it's a big site. It's 30 hectares. The site in Kwinana, I think, and the Rockingham one is 8 to 10 hectares only. So way too much land, but it's good to have the buffers. I will point out the tree line at the bottom there, the bottom half actually goes underwater in a flood. So while we're renting 30 hectares, we're only going to get 20. We tried to move it, they said no. The other part of this project, and we'll get onto why it's complicated with the planning, is we have to build a couple of intermodal transfer stations in Sydney. We have one site already selected at St Mary's. We're looking at another site that's in the north. For people not from Sydney, that's in the northwest, and we're looking at the southeast near Botany Bay or somewhere slightly in the inner west there to try and capture most of the Sydney area. So these transfer stations are not your usual transfer stations for normal waste from truck to truck. We will compact the waste into these containers to try and maximise the delivery. We can probably, we know Veolia gets about 31 tonnes in the containers. Hopefully we get a bit more than that. Veolia has a limit on their containers at the other end where they have to put on a road and haul it up to their landfill. We don't have to do that at the other end, so we're hoping to compact as much into them as we can to make it more efficient. We'll have big loaders that put it on top of the train. This was a slide we put together ages ago to show you the trucks will pick it up in the morning, drop it off, the first cut at 11. We will then haul it out of probably the St Mary's transfer station, like around midnight. It's hard to pull it out during the day due to the Sydney train network. So they take priority. So there will be slots all night long, and that's when most of the freight trains roll out of Sydney. So it'll be up in Parkes by probably, I think it's 11-hour trip. That's our train system. 350 kilometres in 11 hours. You could probably do it a bit quicker in your car, but it will go via Cootamundra, so it'll probably do 480 kilometres on the train, and that's just the best system we've got. It could go straight over the Blue Mountains, but that's trickier with Sydney Trains, with the steepness of that grade, etc. So we're working through that with the different train operators. So hopefully these 2 stations will be, up running well before this thing comes online, and be able to put, 300, 350,000 tonnes through each of them. And for the people out there in Sydney, or the councils especially, that's the location of the Sydney, the St Mary's. I put a 45-minute isochrone for a truck there to show you how far you can get. We're probably going to look at 30 minutes. I think that's more reasonable, but when you finish a run, you've got to try and get to the St Mary's transfer station, and then it'll be put on the train. It's pretty convenient. That's a fairly extensive coverage to make sure that all councils will have an opportunity, I think, to deliver waste to this facility. We also have a southeastern one. It's not decided yet, but that was placed near the Veolia one at Banks Meadow to see how far that goes, and that's 45 minutes covering the North Shore, covering southwest there. So pretty good coverage. Most councils will be able to sort of accommodate the end of their runs and putting it into our transfer station if that happens down the track on your tenders. We have been developing the St Mary's look. That's a 3D render. You can see the train in the background. The site we've selected is on Leehelm Drive there. It's a high quality site, but who are our partners in the consortium. It's 3 or 4 hectares. It's got plenty of room. The train line adjoins the back of the site. So waste trucks will flow in there, the waste collection trucks. It'll be compacted inside the shed, the hall there, and then it'll be just lifted straight out the back fence onto about a 350 metre front of an intermodal terminal owned by Pac National. Loading trains will take an hour, 2 hours. Unloading them is quick. The train haulage is slow. So we're looking at 350,000 tonnes through that, which is quite a lot for a transfer station. I think the Clyde transfer station Veolia is 450. The Manx one is 350, so it's quite feasible and it's doable, and I think it's it's a good solution. What are we kind of doing? We kicked off in January, February. We've started stakeholder management. I think that's our first cab off the rank. We've been out to parks. We're starting on the St Mary's stakeholder management, explaining to people what's happening. There's a few groups in parks that are asking why it's here. There's a few questions that we have to answer. We've done 3 days of drop-in sessions. We've presented to council several times. We're getting the word out there how it works. It's all about emissions out there. It's a greenfield site. It's not so much about the logistics because the train solution actually works really well. You won't have any extra trucks. So people are asking lots of good questions. The council is supportive. RGDC is obviously helping us out on that quite well. Thank you to them on the assistance. And that will continue. We'll continue that all year right through to submission of the DA and then beyond that as well to keep people informed. And that's the website if you need to get more information. Parks Energy Company is up and running. You'll find a lot of information there on the project, more than what I'm giving here. And we'll see how we go on that. So we started in this process. We just appointed consultants to help us with EIS. We're going to spend probably 12 months doing those studies, if not longer. We will be putting it in. There is a special planning pathway for the special activation precincts to try and make it faster and easier. I don't think we'll be given much assistance getting it faster through that. We're going to have to go through the full whole EIS process, a full SSD out there, and we'll try and juggle the SAP pathway out there and also the transfer stations in Sydney. So initial chats with Department of Planning, very positive, like we can run these two at once. You understand we can't have one without the other. good to have a burner out there going, but if you can't get the waste to it, it's not going to work very well, and vice versa. So that's going to be a tricky one to put forward. They're going to have to be juggled together, and there will be, obviously different interactions on both, and hopefully not a two different pathway to get it forward. And so we'll work through that. I don't think that's been sort of done before in a waste to energy plant, so we'll just see how we go. But we're going to keep in close contact with planning and EPA, with many sort of discussions happening at the moment. For the contracts for councils and stuff, what we're planning, and we've already, obviously had some discussions with some councils, and some are very interested. These contracts are similar to what we did instigated in the Rockham plant in Perth those years ago. It's a waste arising, so there's no guarantee on tonnage. I'm not going to ask you have to give us all your tonnage or you're going to pay. We just ask you what is in the red bin is given to us. I think they'll like that. So then if you need to take stuff out of the red bin, for example, FOGO, coming in the future, might take waste volume out of our red bin, we're okay with that. So you can keep processing on different technologies that come up in the future to try and, reduce your volume going to landfill. We do look for long-term. We're going to need long-term contracts to finance this thing. 10 years is probably the minimum. We prefer 15 and stuff. So you have to look at, can you do that? I know they're not the norm in New South Wales, but we have managed to do them in Perth all those years ago, and they are working quite well. And I think most councils realise that, and it's also going to give you a good long-term view of what your costs are going to be. You won't have to risk a landfill levy, which may go up more than CPI, we don't know. So those risks, I think, are worth looking at for this type of facility. And yeah, there's 600,000 tonnes of capacity at the moment. We are looking for waste, and we're going to be looking for waste over the next 2 years. We'll have to have a certain amount of contracts in place before financial close. Our financial close is due to looking at the moment in early 2027, so we will be needing to look at council tenders and processes between now and then. There's the timeline I've been talking about when it comes up. Sorry, there it is. So we just started the process. 24, 23, 22 was winning the tender. We will look to be submitting in Q2 2026, and I suppose the interesting date there is hopefully 3.5 years construction, approvals in late 26, financial close 27, and taking waste in late 2031, which is the plan. So you start looking at your tenders and stuff for that. That's the sort of timeline you're going to have to be looking at and lock it in to try and get waste disposal at this facility. That's it for me. Hopefully that's a brief explanation of what's happening and understanding it.
Thanks, Andrew. Our final speaker today is Preet Brar. I'm sorry if is it right pronunciation? Okay, sorry. From Cleanaway. She's the Executive General Manager of Energy for Waste and Major Projects. You've already heard from her this morning on the panel if you were there, so she's had a busy day, and she's going to talk about Cleanaway's progress with Energy for Waste.
I'm going to try and get this clicker to work. Okay, well, thanks everyone, firstly, for joining us here to listen about this exciting topic. And dare I say, I think the speakers before me have captured pretty much a lot of what I was going to say, so I'm going to try and condense the notes that I had to some relevant points for you all today. So here's what I'm going to do. There's really 3 bits that I'll talk about today. First is a little bit about Cleanaway, if you'll indulge me, and the reason for that is the reason we embarked on a strategy to develop energy from waste projects becomes really clear when you have a bit more understanding of what Cleanaway does as an organization. Second, then we'll just quickly talk about the progress update on where we are with the projects that we are developing. And then finally, I'll close with the vision that we have around a circular precinct and how energy from waste can act as a catalyst for that precinct. So before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the beautiful land on which we meet today, the Gumbaynggirr people. And they're traditionally also known as the sharing people because of they would share the abundance of the bounty that they have here in these lands with other nations, and I think their deep cultural and spiritual connection to the land really, hopefully, gives us the inspiration today as we imagine a bit more of a circular economy for Australia. So the first bit, as we said, a little bit about Cleanaway. So with nearly 8,000, I'm going to try and move this slide. All right. So with nearly 8,000 team members, Cleanaway is Australia's largest integrated waste management and recycling company. We operate across 330 sites in Australia. And by integrated, we mean that we operate across the entire value chain, servicing the needs of really a broad range of customers, all the way from a fish and chip shop or to retailers such as Coles, from servicing the local mechanic and repair shop to large oil and gas customers like Santos, from servicing local councils to servicing Department of Defence. So our customer range is really broad, and the offerings that we bring to the table to try and solve the needs of those clients is equally broad. And also by an integrated value chain, what we mean is that we participate along that whole waste, recycling, recovery value chain. And in that, you're all familiar with our activities in collecting municipal and commercial waste. We handle that material safely through our aggregated transfer stations and ensure that it moves in a safe manner as well to its end destinations. We also, of course, participate in recycling and recovery of materials. For example, through our state-of-the-art recycling facilities, such as the newly commissioned Blacktown MRF here in Sydney. That sorts the materials that go through that facility, which is predominantly the yellow bin or the commingled recycling, as some would know it as, into high-grade, high-quality materials of individual streams of PP, PET, HDP, cardboard, paper, to ensure that it goes into that remanufacturing process, whether onshore or sometimes overseas. The recovered PET, HDP, and PP from these facilities, believe it or not, is in Victoria, is also delivered to recycled REPT, so that's recycled PET plant and recycled HDP plant in Victoria that Cleanaway jointly operates, the assets are jointly owned, we don't operate the facility, but that makes the whole recycled chain a reality in Australia. That is bottle-to-bottle recycling that is happening right here onshore. So hopefully that gives us an inspiration. I think a few years ago, 7-8 years ago, before the China ban, we would have really struggled with the idea of a bottle-to-bottle recycling here in Australia, and that is a reality today, and continuing to progress on that journey. And I think Energy from Waste is also in that journey towards really making it a reality. Our liquids and hydrocarbons business as well collects waste oils and then treats them through our refineries and ensures that they find a way into recycled waste oil. So, for materials that obviously can't be recovered, and that's our residual waste or hazardous waste, we ensure that we treat it safely and make sure it's deposited in its final resting place in an environmentally safe manner. And that's where I think for us the journey on for Energy from Waste really begins, is when we look at that residual waste and what happens to it in the coming decades. Just to bring all of that to life really, really quickly, I'm going to use some numbers. So in 2024, we recycled 104 million litres of oil. We captured 4.8 petajoules of gas from our landfills. And we produced 225 gigawatt hours of electricity. Also collected 2,048 kilotons of material through the CDS schemes that we now operate in most states. And then very quickly on our emissions profile. So if you look at Cleanaway's emissions profile today, 73% is made up of methane that comes from our landfills. And 27% of our emissions profile is made up of carbon dioxide. That mainly comes from the 6,000 fleet of 6,000 vehicles that we operate to collect material across the country. We have aligned ourselves to the 1.5 degree ambition. And I am proud to say that as Cleanaway, we are on target at least to get there, especially with our methane reduction targets. And in that methane space, we have 3 key levers that we are pulling. First is to ensure we continue to work and innovate and put investment into capturing more landfill gas, and that's going really well. You saw that in one of the charts earlier, that was from Joe Pickin. Australia itself is getting really, really good at capturing landfill gas, and of course we play our part in that, which is great. The second is continuing to invest in diversion of food waste away from landfill, and that is through investments in facilities like EGO in Sydney, allowing FUGO processing to go ahead, and also ensuring that we help our customers by coming together with investments through depackaging facilities as well, where you can take that material today that is packaged food waste and ensure that, again, it finds a life and away from landfill. The third pillar in helping us achieve that methane reduction and the 1.5 degree ambition that we've set ourselves really lies on the shoulders of ensuring we can find sustainable and circular pathways away from landfill. And part of that, while energy from waste is by no means a circular solution, is definitely a more superior and environmentally, as well as when you take into account the impacts of broadly on landfill, bringing our energy from waste facilities online is the third and really key pillar for us as well. And so with that in mind, I wanted to, I guess, bring to life that when we embarked on our Blueprint 2030 strategy back in 3 years ago, that is where energy from waste really shaped as Blueprint 1 for Cleanaway, i.e. what that really means is that it is a key pillar that we wanted to invest in to continue and progress our efforts towards diverting away from landfills into building facilities that can help us achieve that transition in Australia. So, what does that all mean for us today, and what are we doing with all those the 3 projects that we have? So some of you may be familiar, some may not be familiar. For us, what that meant 3 years ago was that we embarked on 3 projects to build 3 facilities across the eastern seaboard. 1 in Melbourne, 1 in Brisbane, and 1 in Sydney. I'll come to the Sydney one last, because this is probably where we are probably the most behind, but Melbourne is the most progressed. Before we go to that, let me start by just probably touching really quickly on what is required to develop and hopefully build an energy from waste project in Australia. Keeping aside the social license and political courage, it really varies state by state. And as a company that is progressing 3 projects across 3 states, I think we've got a little bit of an insight as to the challenges and the barriers and what's working, what's not working. But there are some common elements that are shared across the states as well. Very broadly, site selection, of course, with the exception of New South Wales, where you can only build the facilities in the approved location. Planning and environmental approvals, and going through that process and ensuring your project is fit for purpose. That does take a long time. Securing feedstock, I think Andrew touched really well on that in his presentation. Feedstock does underpin these projects, and having those conversations with councils and making sure that we can continue to educate and share the dialogue around what is required, why do we require long-term contracts to bring these facilities online, and how that actually is a shared benefit across both parties when you do participate in contracts of that nature. And then, of course, no less a challenge is securing an EPC partner, and that means somebody that's going to build the facility for you, partner with you, and do it in a way that can come online on time and delivered in full. That requires, of course, that is required by your funding and financing partners, but of course for you as a project developer, that is quite key. And then, of course, securing funding to build your project as well. These are private projects, ensuring that the project is robust enough at that stage so you can get to financial investment decisions. So I'm really excited to hear that Andrew thinks Parks can get there by I think you said quarter 2, 2027 or early 27, and I think that's really exciting because I think a few years ago we would have all felt that the time frame was a little bit longer. So, quickly discussing the variations by state. Of course, we quickly touched on New South Wales. Here, it's not so much about site selection. You do have to you can only build in the locations that are pre-approved by the EPA in those zones. Having said that, in Victoria, we have the CAP process. So that is an additional application that you have to go through as a developer, and all that means is you're allocated a certain cap of feedstock that you can then take through your facility. It is obviously an added process that you need to go through, so it creates some interesting challenges commercially in that market. Okay. Let's see. All right, so quick status update on our projects. Melbourne is the most progressed, as I said earlier. Where we sit with Melbourne is we secured a site nearly 3 years ago. We secured 82 hectares in the north of Melbourne in Wollert, and we started a process to go through the environmental and planning approvals. Where we sit with Melbourne today is that hopefully in the next 3 to 6 months, we hope to hear on the outcome of our 3 applications: our development license with the EPA, our planning permit with the planning department, as well as the CAP application, which we submitted last month. So in the next 3 to 6 months, once we hear the outcomes of those processes, we can then progress to the next stage, which really is all about securing feedstock and getting to financial close in Melbourne. In Brisbane, which is slightly behind Melbourne, we have a site in Bromilton. That's a slightly smaller site than Melbourne. It's about 63 hectares. Bromilton is an industrial estate, so its purpose for an energy from waste facility, it's a really good location to be located in. Of course, you've got to figure out the logistics challenges of moving that material outside of Brisbane, but it's not that far away either. Where we are in Brisbane is we are progressing with our planning and approvals with the aim of having them submitted by Q3 this year. So by September, around October this year, our submissions should be in. So slightly, well, a couple of years behind Melbourne from that perspective, and then progressing that journey similar to Melbourne of landing the approvals, in parallel starting to do the diligence activities around grid connections and ancillary infrastructure that is required to bring these facilities to life. So, best for last, in Sydney. I think all I'm going to say is that we eagerly await the outcome of the New South Wales options paper. We are very interested in the West Lithgow precinct. We have done some early due diligence studies to ensure that material can be moved safely, reliably, and efficiently through rail over the Blue Mountains to that location. So suffice to say that we eagerly wait what happens with the options paper, and we'll be ready to hopefully put forward a proposal for that location once that certainty, I suppose, is there. So, finally, I did say to you there's only 2 slides, and this is our final one. Okay. When we think about West Lithgow, it's a great location because you look at the legacy of that old power station there, and it really encourages you and inspires you to think about a precinct where energy from waste could really activate a precinct opportunity for that region. So talking about precincts, Cleanaway has a vision for enabling a circular precinct as well. Now, industrial symbiosis lies at the heart of our vision for a circular precinct. Some of you may remember the biology class in year 7 or 8 of what is symbiosis. Well, it obviously happens a lot in nature where 2 organisms come, together and they benefit from being with each other for different reasons, whether it be the bacteria that attaches itself to leguminous plants and, gets the nitrogen going up the plant and has a place to live. Well, for us, it is the industrial symbiosis version of that. An energy from waste facility can activate that precinct, and I think for Australia it would be a wasted opportunity if we didn't think in a precinct form. What we mean by that, for example, is if you think about energy from waste, and just imagine for a second, you have an energy recovery facility. You saw both, Rob talked about it as well as Scott did. The outputs are power and heat. Now, you can, of course, export the power directly to grid, and that's baseload power, fantastic. You can also ensure that power has behind-the-meter off-takers as well, if they can co-locate on your facility and have broader benefits that go just beyond the use of power. And that's where heat comes in. Now, with heat, there's a lot of heat produced in these facilities. And when you look at UK and Europe, there's parts in Europe that really took that planning and policy perspective early on and ensured that they had created an ecosystem where you encourage the uptake of heat upfront. UK was slightly behind. They went through a great journey of moving away from landfills into energy from waste, but are just now trying to retrofit onto the heat pathway 20 years later. So I think in Australia we have that opportunity where, for a heat perspective, you can either move the facility and locate it next to an existing user of heat, and that's the case in Maryvale in Victoria. Fantastic example. Or we can attract off-takers of heat to our location to ensure that there is that gain in efficiency of ensuring that a product is not going wasted, which is the heat coming out of the plant. Those are two just really small examples. Of course, the precinct piece goes way beyond that, and again, Scott really touched on that as well earlier, so I won't dwell too much on that. But suffice to say that I think for Australia, the energy from waste can really act as a catalyst to bring this vision to life, and I'll close with that.
Yeah, do you want to? Is there a microphone in the? Yeah, you've got one. Great. Open to questions.
Good evening, Frank Klosterman, SLR Consulting. I've got a question for Scott Reynolds. You told us about your facility and how it was designed for an average temperature of 850 degrees at 2 seconds retention time in the boiler, which is the European conditions or approval conditions. Then you said that your average temperature at the moment is around 1,000 degrees centigrade. So what we do know is when the temperature increases, the velocity of the gas increases. That means the gas will go much quicker out of the boiler than you thought it would be. What does it do to the 2 seconds retention time? What is your spiel you've got between the 850 and the 1,000 degrees or more to guarantee your 2 seconds?
Need a second to do the calculation.
Yeah, so yeah. Everyone loves a technical question. So the 850 degrees for 2 seconds is the minimum, right? So in the design of the plant, you're not working at that level. The is a typical figure for a waste-to-energy plant. We've carried out the T2S testing that we're required to do, and we passed at both full load and minimum load, and we were around about 3.5 to 4 seconds or something like that. So you don't measure it in the temperature piece, it's the resistance time. That's what you need to do to effectively be and furans. So, yeah.
Can you explain what are you talking about with the seconds?
Okay. I didn't start the technical. Just for the record. So, within the boiler, in order to mitigate your dioxin and furan risk, you have to hold a temperature after the last secondary air injection of more than 850 degrees for 2 seconds. Okay? That's the European standard. That's the standard that's adopted. So that goes in your CFD modeling, that goes in your boiler design, that goes in everything. You go through this process, and theoretically, the boiler works. Right? You build the boiler, and then you take the moment of truth, where you plug the probes in, and you measure the temperature, you measure the time between the two planes. You've got a velocity, therefore time can be calculated, and as long as you're above 850 degrees at both planes, you pass, we have a compliant boiler. So maybe we can pick this one up afterwards, because I think there's a couple of people asleep at the back now.
Is there another question? Maybe even I'll ask like one for Rob. I mean, particularly with Preet's talking about the different jurisdictions, when you're developing your policy, and to what extent is there collaboration between state EPAs, and is there an attempt to have similar standards across Australia, or what input does it have in the process?
Yeah, I think as part of any sort of technical and policy development process, we're looking at a range of information sources and inputs, including internationally. We're looking at what's happening over there, and definitely talking with our interjurisdictional neighbours in Australia. So we are doing that work sort of on a technical level, but also just on a broader policy level as well.
Yeah. Thanks. Hello? Oh, yeah, you go.
Yeah. So one of the challenges with the long-term planning, councils need to, or C&I need to plan in advance for these contracts. Andrew, you raised that Parks is going to be waste to rising contracts. Scott, my memory is not both of the WA facilities are Waste Horizon. I think one is and one isn't.
I'm afraid that's not correct.
So Kwinana, because we keep hearing in the east, and so if you could clear this up, about the councils that can't take their FOGO out of Kwinana. So is that a choice as opposed to how the contract's structured? Because I think that's potentially one of the concerns that councils have if they contract early and there's a change in policy that we all deal with. How do we take that feedstock out, right? As an industry, we need to deal with that.
Yeah, 100%. It's an issue that we need to talk about. Yeah, so we have historical contracts and we have new contracts. We have contracts of different types. We have short, long. We have ones that guarantee supply, ones that don't guarantee supply, ones that allow people to take stuff out, some that don't, some have high standards, low standards. It's a complete mixed bag. So I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all piece. I think there's a piece there that when you actually understand the operational need is a key thing, because there'll be times when we need the supply of waste, and there'll be times when the councils want to put it in, there'll be times when it needs to be reversed as well. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all, and there isn't one contract type that fits for any facility. If a council wants to do Waste Horizon, they can do Waste Horizon. If they want security, that they need a slot. I mean, if you've got more Waste Horizon in an area than a facility can take, then there'll be competition for who goes in. So if people want to reserve a slot, then they can reserve a slot. That's just the nature of the beast. But yeah, there isn't a one-size-fits-all in terms of procurement of waste.
Can I ask a follow-up question, or probably to any of three of you? But yeah, this is a challenge. Like, councils have very rigid tendering processes, and they're looking at the moment for contracts that are going to be focusing on traditional landfill at the same time as waste for energy. So what are the key differences or requirements that you would need to sort of see added to these contracts, like including material composition, beyond your song about Horizon, but because are these contracts are probably not going to be fit for purpose. Sorry, I'm probably asking with my legal hat on, but they're not going to be necessarily fit for purpose for you. So what do you, in a broad sense, what do you think council should be aware of in terms of the key differences?
Well, I think the timing's obviously one of them, right? So if council says we're going to do a contract in 2032 and we're saying we're coming online in 2031, there has to be maybe some sort of flexibility that this thing could be delayed by more than a year. I've seen how many the delays have gone, not just in Kwinana building, but also in development. I think that flexibility is there as well. And then obviously an alternative in the meantime. The contract should look into that, whether we go, right, we'll take it to landfill. Now, eventually down the track, you probably have 2 or 3, hopefully, plants running, and you can take it to another waste to energy plant. But which is what happens sort of overseas. But I think also flexibility on the, just say the rail line goes down. We've got a second rail line, we'll look at that. Or you could truck it for short periods if the councils are okay with that. There's a problem with the transfer station. Okay, we've got to double up on the second transfer station, those sort of things in the contract. Helpful, they're going to look at that sort of stuff and sort of where.
I think I just wanted to quickly add that if you look at, for example, the Victorian landscape, right, it's slightly different to New South Wales, but if you look at Melbourne, what you see is going to play out now for the remaining councils in Melbourne that are not already secured into the Maryvale facility is, from a contractual perspective, you are trying to make up your mind. So if you put yourself in the council shoes, it's a really difficult thing to navigate without sufficient information on the table. You're trying to make up your mind. What's going to happen for your ratepayers? What's the best solution? Is landfill still going to be a cheaper alternative, and there's abundant supply at least until 2040 in Melbourne? Or will levy go up to a point where it will become really the right decision is to lock into an energy from waste facility? That's one. The councils themselves have to then shift to a contractual model that, as you said, you're not really used to. In New South Wales, we still see 7+ 3-year contracts. In Melbourne, it's generally 3 or 4, maximum 5. There was a state-run procurement that happened over a period of time, but that will not be repeated. That's clear in Victoria. So again, from a council's perspective, that procurement is an expensive exercise, and you really need to educate yourself. What is the right time? Is this the right thing for my ratepayer? So I think there are some signals that are missing in the market today in Melbourne, and I think Sydney is a little bit better in that space. But there are real questions, and I think the only way we can get there is by having that dialogue, engage, because I think that the project developers will sit there and absolutely talk openly with you. We share a similar view that it has to be waste arising contracts. We would love guaranteed contracts. That probably will mean some benefits back to the councils as well, but we also understand the fear that sits at the heart of put-pay contracts, which is, will that curb my ability to do recovery initiatives, such as what's happened with FOGO that Gail pointed out in Western Australia? Waste arising gives me that flexibility, but of course that risk is transferred across to the project to then deal with the variability of waste, and that's something that we need to live with.
I think the only thing, just maybe add on the timing piece, is I think, as you said, be honest about it. Understand that you might be signing a contract for ultimately going to waste to energy, but that isn't the today piece. That's the tomorrow piece. And how you manage that gap is the piece. The timing won't be perfect. The commissioning won't be perfect. You'll have to be on and off. You'll have to have alternatives. And putting that out there and having that honest understanding and discussion up front is the way to do it. And to work out how you do it and how long, how you extend, on what basis, that's the key thing. But yeah, there are plenty of ways to structure it, plenty of options out there. We just need to have an open conversation about it.
And I saw, Scott, your diagram was, Kwinana looked like 13 years from signing the supply agreement. What sort of, maybe it's confidential, but what sort of commitment were you looking for, at that point?
Yeah, so I can't profess to be, well, I certainly can't profess to have been there when that was signed. The fact that City of Kwinana, we sit in their local government area, they were committed to it. They knew that this was the right outcome for their waste, that they were committed to stand by that. They knew at that point they didn't have a date. They had nothing firm, but they knew this was the journey they wanted to go on. And I think they've been on that journey, they've been understanding it, and that's the key piece, is that they, by helping and the information that Andrew's sharing, there is the right thing to do, is to explain to them that this is something that's coming, this will be when it will be, and if things happen, be honest about what's happened. The honesty and that will get you through the journey, and that's what's, as you say, kept these guys on board for Kwinana for 10 plus years. I mean, that's a huge journey, and I can't profess to have done all that myself, I'm not. But it's about managing those things and being honest with them and working with them, understanding their needs, and as their needs change, you change with it.
Thanks.
Yeah, hello. Hello, yeah, you can hear me? Yeah, Ronan Cullen here from Talis Consultants, and we're involved in the preparation of all the major contracts for the two waste energy plants in the West, in Western Australia. That's where I'm from, you probably guessed by my accent. But of course, the original contract was a put and play, but that was a very old contract, and of course the policy setting in Western Australia was very different then. There was no mandate for FOGO. Actually, there actually wasn't even a strategy back in those days in Western Australia. Since then, the market has evolved, and all modern contracts in Western Australia have been waste supply. So waste supply has been driven by councils, but what they want to do to make sure they're not limiting their future options in relation to diversion and waste avoidance, and it's been accepted by the market. So historically, yeah, the put and pay, but make sure that's not a hindrance for councils here in relation to looking for future options on waste energy, because what do we do with our residual waste? There's always going to be residual waste, and putting it in landfill is antiquated. We've got to move forward,
Thanks. Any other questions in the audience? I think
while we wait, I'll address one of the points that was raised, in regards to a fear that we commonly hear is about that supply chain, given the policy settings in New South Wales, having to move material outside of the metropolitan region, and what happens when the rail line is down. I think, yes, there will be alternatives, but you also have to keep in mind, and Scott's the best to probably talk to this, that the bunker itself is designed to hold up to 7 days of waste. So you have some buffer in the way the facility is designed, and on top of that, you of course then need to ensure that you've got resilient backup solutions that can be deployed should, I guess, any of those eventualities do happen. Actually, that exists today as well with current options.
Can I ask out of interest, sorry, you were talking, Scott, as well about, for anyone, but about the composition and what if contamination, like what would you be rejecting from from the MSW that would be accepted at landfill?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, What should be in residual waste going to landfill is pretty much what should be in residual waste going to energy recovery. The problem is, at the minute, nobody looks and nobody cares. We can see hazardous waste going in. We can see particularly white goods. We see metals are all going in to landfill at the minute because they are now coming to us and we're having to pick them out and remove them. Those are in the waste stream, gas bottle, you name it. That culture hasn't changed, and that's not a reflection of what we do in this room. That's a reflection of how we as a society think that we can lift the lid and drop it and then that's it gone. The fact is that we're now preparing a fuel that somebody else is going to handle. We are going to look inside your bin. That's the reality. It's probably not a good message, but that's the reality, because we need to know, because we put our people at risk, we put our investment at risk if we process the wrong material. So yeah, we pull out industrial ovens, half cars, you name it, someone will send it to us. That's the reality of waste. We all know is that the only limiting factor is the size of the bin, and if you give somebody a big bin, they'll put big things in it. So once you've moved past that, that's the reality. But yeah, understanding that fuel and going on that journey is another piece, right? And the sooner we talk about it, and yeah, you know, whether you want to process mattresses or not, you can. Processing lots and lots of big king-size mattresses at one time is not a good idea. But those are the sorts of discussions and things we need to have to actually help educate people, and then we come on this journey together. But that education can start now. People, if we change the habits of what we put into residual waste streams now and remove those, that's only a good thing now.
Thank you. Any final questions? No. Everyone, thank you so much. I've loved it. Thank you. Just the last announcement. I've been told if anyone's parked